Welcome everybody. Welcome to the ARC Specialties first Friday lunch. Good to see everybody. Happy New Year. Glad you're here. I got a good feeling about 2024. So I hope to see you here next month too. Normally we cancel the January event, but we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a non-technical talk. It's not really non-technical though, because a young friend of mine, Nathan Sumrall, is our speaker. He's a welding engineer, and he decided he wanted to go rate Baja. Here's what I think the backstory is. This is me back in 2007. I ran the Baja 500 on a bike, and you can see here they got a lot of water traps. And what they tell you when you're running Bajas, if you ever see a big crowd at an area that shouldn't be challenging, that means something bad's happened. What they'll do is they'll booby trap the track. And then it's not malicious, they're just trying to make it all more interesting. And so, for example, at one point they cut down a tree and put it across the track, made it jump. But they didn't put enough ramp on it, so almost ended up going over it. But then you get to this river crossing, and you can see it wasn't very deep, but there's a whole bunch of people there, and I was like, I didn't know why that was. So what they've done is they dammed it up. And so I was on a Honda 400, and I put it in first gear, started going across the creek. It's got an exhaust 38 inches off the ground. It went underwater. They had dammed it up so much it was over 3 foot deep. Bike kept running. I got to the other side. I roosted them with rocks, took off. Got to the next creek, same thing. Except in that creek, I hit a rock, and I'm about to fall down in a 36-inch creek. Okay, bike's not 36 inches tall when it's laying over, so it's going to ruin the bike and ruin the race. So I wheeled the bike, hooked the wheel on the wall, fell into the creek. Bike stalls. I get out, try to start the bike. It won't start. My boots are full of water. If you're wearing boots that are up to here, so I'm laying on the ground. The Mexican guy's draining my boots out over my head, and I hear the bike start. So they bump started my bike and got it running. I jump on the bike, roost it with rocks, and take off. Well, Nathan hears all this story, and he says, "That sounds like fun."
I want to do that.
But he had twice the budget. We could only afford 2 tires. He wanted to do it with 4 tires. Tell us the rest of the story. Nathan Sumrall, welding engineer.
Can everyone hear okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for making time this afternoon. I am Nathan with Good Mayhem Racing, and today I'd like to provide you an engineer's guide to the desert. How you can make a kid's dream real with off-road racing. How's the laser button? Okay, I don't need that button. I need this one. There we go. To start things off, I would like to thank our sponsors for our effort with the Baja 1000. We had 10 of them. We had TPM Racing out of San Antonio, Fastlane Auto Service out of Austin, Total Chaos, Next Gen, and DC Power Engineering over in California. We had UC Motorsports. They're kind of a Colorado team now, but they also came out of Houston. Treaty Oak Off-Road, my day job, Superior Cladding, Dougie's Garage, and there's one more sponsor. What was it? Oh yeah, ARC. So Dan, thank you so much for helping us make that happen. So, deserts, right? That's a kind of a scary word. What comes to your mind when you see that word, desert? Open discussion.
Ice cream.
Ice cream. What? No, that's a dessert. Yeah, we're talking about a desert. All right. Sand. Okay. Death. Yes, very appropriate. What else? Dry. Okay, we got cacti, we got tumbleweeds, the Wild West. Yeah, if you take all of that and roll it together into a tube and plunge it in water that you can't drink, and you get Baja, the dessert of deserts. Yes. So, over there, let's see if this laser pointer works. Yeah, that's Mexico. This is also Mexico, but the cool part. So this is that coffee cup handle of Mexico, and it is a desert. This is Baja. Welcome to Baja. This place is very sparsely populated. There's only a few million people there, and the vast majority of them live up here, where you can't even see, and then down here, where you can also barely see. Anywhere where there's green, there's probably people. This whole tan section right here, very Spartan, very deserted, very dangerous, very lonely. But the people there that live there, I mean, for the third world conditions they're having to deal with, they really take pride in what they have. And they're willing to share it. They're like you or I, right? They love two things, tacos and auto racing. Dan is smart. He does the whole four-tire thing on roads, but there's no road racing in Baja per se. You don't get NASCAR with oval tracks. You don't get Formula One there. There's just no city infrastructure like that to support it. So the kind of racing you can do in Baja is desert racing. So this is a super cool trophy truck. It's one of those $1 million race cars that has four tires. Mine also has four tires, but it's nowhere near like that from a budget standpoint, nor performance. Where he can go 80 miles an hour, as a race car, I can do 20. These things are very fast. But what's really crazy to think about is the people on dirt bikes can go as fast as those trophy trucks. And I had that dream. I wanted to race in Baja as well. And as a little kid, I would look at maps like this and say, oh, this is so cool. You got this whole Baja 1000, and 1000 is a big number, therefore it must be good, right? So do you see all of these little red lines and squiggles? This is the map that they release to you and say, if you want to race, you got to follow this. Good luck. They also give you a GPS file, and it's pretty Spartan, pretty concise. That's what it looks like, that course over there on the far right side of the screen. And there's a little tiny scale down here that says 100 miles on it. So if this is 100 miles, another 100 miles, another 100 miles, another 100 miles, so on and so forth, you can see how you can get 1,000 miles in a straight line pretty fast. However, the organizers can't do math. So when they said that this was a Baja 1000, it was really the Baja 1300 miles because it wasn't in a straight line. So this was the longest Baja 1000 on record, 1,277 miles to be exact. The only one that was longer was the Baja 2000, and that's a really big number. That one's kind of scary. I didn't want to do that. But my dream started out as a little kid. You know, just a little short 4 or 5-year-old guy walking into Toyota dealerships, going to the service center, seeing the trophy trucks on the wall like this Iron Stewart Toyota. And I was like, ooh, Toyotas are fast. I want to race one someday. Toyotas are not fast. They aren't even known for accelerating quick. They're not fast cars. But they did have a great personality in the 90s, and I wanted to carry that. So I wanted to understand the challenge of desert racing, the specifications involved, how you get a team together, and then actually race it. But the actual development and understanding of how to do it is as wide a gap between the two photos you see here of this little chubby kid that loved winning science fair grand prizes in middle school to this chubby little engineer that, as a full-grown man, would actually race the Baja 1000 and realize what this guy really wanted to do. In the car I grew up in. So instead of having a cool race truck or even having a Ford F-150 like anyone else would, I used the family's SUV, the Toyota 4Runner I grew up with. They bought it when I was 8 years old. At 200,000 miles, they gave it to me for graduating college. At 280,000 miles, we turned it into a race truck. So how do you actually build a car for desert racing? You do 3 things. 1, you imagine every way the desert can kill you. Remember how he said death earlier? That's very appropriate to think about here. Number 2, you think about how auto racing can kill you and your friends. All right. Number 3, you take all of that thought and knowledge, put it together, and prevent it as best you can. Yeah, you try to prevent it all from happening ahead of time. And if you can do that, that's great. But there's another really big challenge. We are here in Houston, okay? You are here, right? Baja is over there. It's very far away. So if you can get your whole race car thing figured out, you still have to go over here and all the way down. It's not like you can go across mainland Mexico. No, the race course is over here. So you got to go all the way across the United States to California and then go south. You see this little green flag though, down there? That's the starting point. So we had to get there. to start the race this year. This race was particularly unique in the world of Baja because out of the Baja 1000s, they're usually loops that happen in the north, or they are point-to-point races from top to bottom. But that's specifically the qualifier. They start from the top and go down. In the 50-year history that they have done this race, this was the first time they went from the bottom up. So everyone's logistics were reversed. Fortunately, I didn't have that problem because I've had no logistics. I'm learning everything as I go, right? But to give you an idea how far away this is, you can take Google Maps, zoom all the way out, and you can still see turns. This is far away. If you're really going to take the time commitment to go, you're taking 3 weeks off vacation to do this. And if you only got 3 weeks off the whole year, that's it. But if you are okay with the drive time and the commitment to go there and practice and actually race, and if you want to build a race car, it's simple. You just follow the specifications they give them. You read them. They will have a whole bunch of information, about 100 or 200 pages worth of content in 4 major documents. One of them is the competition regulations. Those are things are like, this is how your race car has got to be built before you race. The general regulations, this is what happens if you hit somebody in Mexico. The racer brief, do this in the race, and then the penalty bulletins are like, if you do that, you're in big trouble. Oh, and by the way, if your teammates do that, you're in really big trouble. Don't do those. Okay. Read all that. You got to have a decent chance of starting the race. Because starting the race is its own reward. There's a process to get there if you decide to build your own car. And the specifications they give you are holistic. They got a lot of stuff going on. They'll cover information like the roll cage, how you maintain your gasoline with your fuel cell, the fire suppression. Hey, you know what? You're driving a possible fireball. You got to think about that. How you communicate, the navigation equipment that you have to have, how your truck's seeking marked, and the survival supplies on board. Again, we're in the desert, right? It might be populated in some places, but there's other places where you're very, very alone. So they give you these nice little pretty graphics and say, hey, build your stuff like this. Buy these kinds of resources. Put them together. Okay, so this roll cage looks pretty concise, right? Well, that's just an example. When you actually take their specifications and try to put it to your car, it looks like that. A lot more complicated than just the simple words on the page. But in all reality, I'm a welding engineer. Right, I should be able to figure that out. So, and the race code is chock full of verbiage that in manufacturing in Houston we are used to. For example, all welding must be of the highest quality with full penetration and no undercutting of the parent metal. All welds shall conform to the American Welding Society D11 Structural Welding Code, Chapter 10, Tubular Structures and Standards for the Material Used. Oh, great, great. We are fabricating a tubular structure to AWS D11 Class 10. I know what that means. And I know there's an ultrasonic evaluation at the end of it. So at that point, I best qualify and prepare and treat it like anything else I would do at my day job. So at that point, I qualified myself for that out-of-position welding. It's all TIG welded. And from there, designing all of the joints to be nice, strong, compliant in the right spots, rigid in the other spots. And from there, one of the things that most people don't talk about with roll cages is that the best way to do it is to weld each tube individually. When a car is made out of perfectly symmetrical tubes, they probably just took all of the pipes, shoved them together, and then welded around the perimeter of them. That's the easiest way to die with a roll cage, because you have half the weld that's not there. So at that point, you take one tube, you prep it, you do all of your notching, you make sure your gaps are right, and then you weld it. You're like, all right, then you inspect it. All right, you're all done with that. Then you do the next one. It's excruciating. It took me 800 hours to actually do the roll cage. From designing it, to bending it, to fabricating it, to reviewing the MTRs and welding it. Yeah, it was a lot of work. But there's some parts of it that are consumables, things that you want to get destroyed. So for example, you see this red part right here? That's protecting the fuel cell. If you see the fuel cell in this photo, we were special, we were unique. We had a 40-gallon fuel cell. Most people don't have that kind of fuel capacity on board. Where most teams had to fill up within the first 100 miles, We can go 300 miles off-road, which means that this truck could actually do about 600 miles on-road on the highway if I was that bored. But that really actually helped us out with our fuel strategy. But this whole red thing here, that's just a bash bar for a trophy truck to run into and us to throw it off. It's just something to protect the rest of the vehicle. You have to think about stuff like that with an off-road car. It's not like NASCAR where they just bump you and keep going. If you're not moving and you're stuck and someone hits you at 100 miles an hour, you have to survive a 100-mile-an-hour crash. And those trucks weigh 10,000 pounds. Ouch. So that fuel cell, if it catches fire though, or if someone else is catching fire, you have to have that plan in as well. And because there's this whole third-party verification and inspection thing that's supposed to happen at the start of the race, we got to have that knowledge beforehand. So I'm figuring out where all of my nozzles for the fire suppression, you know, like your fire extinguishers, imagine one of those but on roids, right? So it's spraying you, your buddy, the engine bay, the fuel cell, and I had to give that to a third party for them to review and critique as well. And I haven't even gotten to the start of the race yet, right? I'm just building a race truck. So you take that and the communications that are involved, you're really, really lucky to start this race just because of the amount of time and effort and discipline it takes to keep going, especially when you don't have like a factory-funded team. That sleeping and driving, that's a skill I haven't figured out yet, and maybe you have. But at that point, you got to hand it off to the next guy. So it's a relay race. You're passing the baton of the race car to the next team. Save the car for the next team, okay? So Steve, right here, he is my mentor in all of this, multi-year Baja veteran, fantastic guy. And his whole entourage of guys that helped us make it happen, it was amazing. So Steve is right here. Ron, he was one of our volunteers. Kelly, my wife, incredible woman. She's been very patient with me throughout this entire process, let me tell you. From there, we have Corey, Sam, Gavin's hiding back there. We also have Colin. He's a Ultra 4 off-road guy, so if you're familiar with King of the Hammers, he's racing at the end of this month. From there, we had Thomas, who was my navigator. I was a driver. We have Darren, and there's a couple other guys that I'm missing here. Oh yeah, we also have Doug and Sam as well. We had just 12 people going to this race, and that included the people that were driving and co-driving. It wasn't like a big team. And you have to bring all of the infrastructure with you. And fortunately, we had help from people in La Paz. I somehow hit the jackpot on where we actually stored our cars at, because you're in Mexico, right? Your stuff gets stolen. It's a fact of life. So if you can pay for secured parking, great. We accidentally bought a Fast and Furious shop for the week. So there were people that had aluminum welders there on standby, TIG welding equipment, fabricators, bending stuff. I mean, those guys were just so cool to help out. So shout out to Brando and all of his buddies for hosting us that week. For 12 people, we had a lot of equipment with us. We divided up into 4 actual sub-teams. 2 of them stayed in the north, 2 of them went to the south. I was one of the south team guys. We were planning 4 or 5 pit stops between all 12 of us and our chase teams. But you see these cool vehicles up here? These are called pre-runners, or vehicles you practice the race course with. Because if you're going to have a half decent chance of even finishing this race, let alone surviving it, you need to go experience it beforehand. You take a scenic tour through the race course, and then you write down all of your notes. That's pre-running, okay? Well, we had 3 pre-runners, we had 1 race car, and that was our goal, to go to Mexico, pre-run, do this relay race with each other, figure out how to eat and sleep, and ideally finish the Baja 1000. Remember how you have this big, long map? Well, when you have 12 people spread across a miniature continent, it's pretty lonely. Team cohesion was very hard to maintain just because everyone was spread out so much. So I had a lot of salty people helping me out. I was very grateful for their help. I and Team 2 were in the southern section, and we were just going to pass the car back and forth until we can get those team members that were up north. The other 6 dudes that were here and went south for race day. But that's not the complete perspective, right? Because when we pre-run, when we practice the race course, you got to take notes. Hey, there's a cliff there. Don't drive off the cliff. You're not going to go into orbit. You're going to go down, right? From there, There's a danger, you gotta write that down. The organizers aren't gonna tell you that's there. You have to go experience it for yourself. So at that point, we are taking all the notes we can and sharing them together. And shoot, we'll even share them with other race teams because we don't want them to drive off a cliff either. It's pretty expensive at a bare minimum, and usually people die. We don't want that. But when you take all of the information that's really necessary, like where's the random honor zone? Where's another gas station? Where's a hospital? When you take all of that knowledge and put it into your files, you will have thousands of data points for a single race. So much so that in the first 100 miles alone of this race course, there are hundreds of notes about the things that we should be driving through or avoiding. Because how Dan mentioned earlier, how the locals made traps. As soon as we found out there was a trap, we'd write it down, right? You really want to know that kind of stuff. So, race day, all right? It's been about a week and a half going from Houston to the bottom of Mexico, down to La Paz. It's about 50 degrees outside. The water is still, we're at the very beginning of this capital city's waterway, and we're gonna start. The vehicles that are starting in front of me are the little VW Beetles. You know those things that, you know those little quirky cars? Those are called Class 11 cars, and those people can drive. If you are a person taking this little two-wheel drive air-cooled machine and racing the Baja 1000 with it, you know how to drive. They passed me. They're fast, right? And I had a car that was way more built than theirs. But you know what? When it's time to go, everyone's the same. You know how, like, when you go to an arcade and they'd have the flashing green light saying, go, 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 and they wave the green flag? It's exactly how it happened here. And we are tearing through the streets of La Paz in a race car. Thousands of people lining the sides of the roads and cheering as loud as you can think. This is their Super Bowl, okay? Hundreds of thousands of people come to see this race event for free. Because, hey, you can just go camp and be on the race course. Check it out. That's amazing. But once you got off those commercial roads and started driving through neighborhoods, they slow you down. Speed zones. You can't drive too fast through a neighborhood, right? It's not like you want to careen through someone's house. Painful, let alone dangerous. So we would have to slow down. And I wish it had cruise control. The truck had cruise control when I grew up with it. Now I took it out because race cars don't need cruise control. No, I could if I had nailed that 37 miles an hour cruise control, man, I would have made shade. But eventually, they said go. On the navigation, my navigator's looking down at the GPS and it says go, go, go. Therefore, I hit the gas and go as fast as I can, safely, saving the car for the next man. But yeah, there's people lining the race course, middle of nowhere, right? There's a random cool Porsche Cayenne that's chasing us. All right, we're trying to make sure we stay out of everybody's way, but that doesn't always happen because when my navigator says, hey, there's a dip, you're about to drive through it. All right, great. Okay, now we got an uphill climb. We're going up. Oh, it's so much. We got this virtual checkpoint we got to hit. If we miss, we lose, right? So drive slow through that, and there's a step. Okay, a step means your front tires are airborne while you're driving uphill. And there's a completely stuck car on this side. There's a trophy truck right here that's crashed. You can see a fender weld down here where someone drove off the cliff. And we're just driving around all these people are stuck. And the locals are like, hey, this is amazing. Let's put this on Instagram. Let's put it on YouTube. I'm like, don't die. And really, the dangers are ever present. But hey, with good pre-running notes, that documentation from practicing and sharing with your neighbors, well, someone said, hey, there's ditches on both sides. Watch out. Okay, cool. So I'm driving along, and you can't see it here for this shadow, but it's a 4-foot hole that would swallow my truck, and I'm straddling it like this. You know, I got that super long arm suspension, and it's holding these in the middle. I'm like, don't fall, please don't fall. Because if you notice, there's a tire back there. There's a $1 million race car right behind me, and I'm in his way. There's a fence post, so I can't get around that. But hey, that's Baja. That's desert racing, baby. And the silt This talcum powder sand is unlike anything I've ever driven through in my life. This stuff is fine as powder. It gets in your lungs. It gets in your engine's lungs too. That's pretty expensive. You don't want that to happen. And when you're racing another car side by side and you guys wreck because neither of you can see each other through this dust, that's racing. We actually had a collision with these guys. We were going through in our four-wheel drive going 20 miles an hour, like as fast as we could through this silt. They come through it at 80. They can't see us and they can't steer to avoid us, so boop. That's at mile 70. But hey, I was still ahead of them at the end of that collision, so I'm like, hey, let's go. Let's just get out of their way and keep going. But how far do you go? As a person, the human factor is the thing that will make or break a race, right? Toyota Corporate sent a race truck of their own with the Lexus team. I say that year. It was 2 months ago. Who am I kidding? Yeah, so, and they had some managers come by, single us out and say, hi, we're glad you exist and we're glad you're bringing a Toyota 4Runner here. And they looked through it top to bottom, sat there, took photos, and one of the managers looked at me and said, the only reason why this truck isn't going to finish is because of the human factor. He was right. Because when I got really tired, it was my turn to leave and give the truck away. I drove about 300 miles, and to be quite candid, 4 years worth of late nights and welding and fabricating after my full-time job and sleeping and trying to plan, and I was really pooped. 200 miles, I was exhausted. At 300 miles, I was like, I'm out of this car. I trust you. Let's move on. And the second team took the car, and they did their best. But Baja is a cruel master in a desert form. We did have a mechanical failure at mile 366.6. 666, if you guys are a little superstitious there. And there was a rocky canyon, and then there was a hard left, and then there was a long right, and then we lost the front spindle of the truck. And if you're on a factory team with 30 or 40 people, someone says, yo, that other spare car that we brought to Mexico, take that apart and bring me that part. I'm a new guy. I'm on a budget. I don't have a spare car laying around. So what do? I go beg the locals. There's someone nearby on just watching the race with their Toyota 4Runner, and I'm like, you have the perfect car. Can I tear apart your personal vehicle and put it in my race truck? I am 3,000 miles away from home, and I really need help. Can you help me? And they said, if it was our car, we'd say yes. But the actual owner of the race car, or of their 4Runner, was in another race car, and they couldn't reach him on Saturday. So the parts were physically there, but I'm not going to murder people for it. So at that point, we physically had to stop. We didn't have the parts to fix it. It was bad luck. The guys did their best, and we got to mile 366. Let me put it this way. We earned 366 miles of this race. Most of the people that didn't finish did not finish before mile 330. And remember how long of a map that was? There were 1,000 miles to go in this race. It was brutal. So if you want to do desert racing, if you have the dream to do it, respect the challenge, read the specs, find the team that can lovingly, patiently make it happen with you, and have the stamina to start, because finishing is its own reward. So again, how far did we go? This was the full Baja 1000 map, all 1,277 miles worth. We were forced to stop here. 30 miles deep into the mountains, nothing but race course. We had to wait for all of the other race cars to pass before we could go recover the team and the race car that were stranded in the middle of nowhere. And then we have to drive home. So, what now? Let's bring on 2024.
Quick question. Can you talk about the logistics of fuel?
Yes.
Bring it with you from the States and you fuel up every 100 miles or whatever?
Sure. So our fuel strategy had a huge kink in it. This was the first event in SCORE's 50-year history where they required Formula One style dry brakes to fill up the cars. So that means that there's this cool nozzle that pushes into the car and pulls it back out, so then you have little to no fuel spills. Guess what? You're going to get spilled fuel anyway. But they were not allowing people to actually fill up at gas stations. So at that point, you have multiple jugs of fuel, 5 gallons, 10 gallons, 11 gallons worth of fuel, and 2 guys lifting up this 150 pounds worth of flammable liquid and then pushing it into your truck. And then you have to do that at every pit stop. So for us, we were going to fill up at mile 300, mile 525. Oh, we also had a splash at mile 95. I forgot about that. And we were going to fill up at mile 600, at mile 743, and at 1115. Those were the 5 or so places that we were actually planning to fill up the truck. And we were overly conservative in our fuel consumption. We thought we were going to get 7 miles per gallon, and we really drove the truck easy. We were getting 13 miles per gallon. To give you some context, most race cars out there, most race trucks, only get 3. So we were getting 10 miles per gallon more fuel, like efficiency out of it than the common race cars, because we're an OEM vehicle, right? This is a stock 4Runner from the 90s. You put fuel in there that doesn't have ethanol, it gets really fuel efficient, as we found out. So, yeah, there is our strategy for you.
But were there gas stations at those points? Did you drop off the gas on the way from the States?
We weren't allowed to bring gas from the States because Mexico would tax it. Anything that you bring in gets taxed. Anything you take out, they really don't care about. So we had to fill up with gasoline in Mexico. And 87 grade gasoline has a lot of water in it. So that'll just break your car. So you use 91. You use Supreme fuel to help ensure that you actually get remotely good gas. And yeah, I have a lot of Mexican fuel on my back porch. And because it has a super fancy dry brake, I have no way to fill up my regular car with it.
How about the frame? What did you use for material in those tubes?
Sure. So race code requires 2 kinds of steels to be used, either 1026 DOM tubing, drawn over manual, and 4130 anneal. You can use either of those materials. You can't use anything else.
When you weld it, do you have to post-weld heat treat it after that?
Some of the guys that are welding 4130 sure do, but they do it at an aircraft-style heat treat where they are actually using flame, and they'll make it cherry red for about 5 minutes and bring it down. But with the regular 1026 DOM tubing, no. You just weld it as is, and that's good enough. Really, think about it this way. The strength of your roll cage should be from its structure rather than the welds itself. If you can do that, you'll have a very robust roll cage. To build on that point, you're not allowed to butt weld anything at all. So if you have a tube crink, you got to cut it off and replace it from both ends, which gets really difficult when you have 500 pounds worth of that tubes in your truck. So to weld mine, I had to use a crane because I was welding it to the frame, but I had to weld over the top of all of these tubes over my head. So we dropped the roll cage. I'd fit one tube, weld the top of it, lift it up into my car, and weld underneath it. What's really, really ironic about that, though, you're hot, sweaty, you're part of the ground at that point. I probably got shocked 100 times welding my roll cage. And there was one time where I was welding up this gusset, and I got shocked so bad that I flinched, and I threw the TIG torch. It became like a 3-foot-long lightning bolt, and then when it hit the other part of the truck, it burned a hole through the truck.
Are you talking about welding out on the track?
No, this is all the prefabrication work. We had no weld repairs in the field. I wish we could have done weld repair, but the kind of stuff that broke could not be welded, at least not at that time. So, I ran out of the presentation.
How long did 300 miles take you to do?
300 miles took me 10 hours. So,
30 miles an hour.
yeah, we actually averaged 43 miles an hour moving, but we had 2 major traffic jams. A a couple of pro race trucks and VW Beetles got stuck within the first 30 miles. Someone had to get airlifted out. They got hurt really bad. So we were waiting about an hour for that. And then we had our first pit where we stayed around 15 to 20 minutes too, just so they could do it once over the truck after that crash and make sure it was good to go. But yeah, to answer your question, these are all of these tubes. That's 800 hours of the work for one car.
What are you gonna do differently?
I am.
Carry a spare spindle.
Yeah, well, carry a spare car.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one.
So, long term, the goal would be to have an entire spare vehicle to harvest parts from. And some of the super high speed guys, the cars they use to support the race, the chase trucks, if you're lucky, they have the same parts, so you can just rip it off their car. And you can leave their car in Mexico while you keep racing the bottom of the mountain.
So in the case that you did break down somewhere like that and you had parts,
Mhm.
someone runs that to you then?
Yes, this is a
So-
chase race where people can come help. That's right.
So they can just, so that's why it would be key where you have these people.
Yes.
So that it's not so far either.
Right. So, because
Because it has to be a chase, right? Yeah,
Right.
so-
yeah, so your pit crew is also doing a 1,000-mile race parallel to you on the highways. They're trying to go fast enough to keep up with you, but not too fast to where if you break, they have to double back and get you. Yeah, that's right. So do that with 12 people across 1,200 miles. Hard.
What percentage of cars that start this race make it to the end?
Maybe 30. If you're lucky. 3 out of 10 cars will finish. Yeah, so to give you an idea, out of everyone in my class, only one finished. And there were like 10 cars. So that's a 90% failure rate. I was one of those 90 guys, as you can tell.
So your structure, how'd you decide to use, in some areas, maybe a sweeping bend or bend too? Does it have a bend?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of bends.
And then as opposed to maybe a structural joint, a welded joint, was there?
Sure. So you're talking about a mitered connection where two pipes will butt up together and be welded at that corner.
Right.
It's not allowed
Okay,
because that's butt weld.
that's what we mean.
Yeah, even if it's not perfectly in line, if the two are like this, if you're going to have them mitered together, they have to have so many tubes reinforcing that node. It's crazy. It's like 8 tubes.
Are those pre-manufactured sweeping elbows, or would you have a bending process?
Yep, I did a rotary draw bender. So at that point, you physically buy a tubing bender that has a long enough bend radius to not collapse the wall thickness. And that's really the requirement. The other part of the roll cage stuff that we didn't talk about took me 2 years to figure out. For that bend of the tube, you must figure out where it goes and then how tight of a radius you need. Race code forbids you from having a bend radius tighter than 3 times the width of the tube. So if you got a 2-inch tube, you have to have it be at least a 6-inch centerline radius for that curve. However, if you do that, the wall thickness gets so thin that now you're going to fail UT for wall thickness. You got a 10% tolerance on that wall thickness, right? So and if you only have an 1/8 inch to work with, you got 12.5 thousandths of an inch before you fail. So at that point, the longer your bend radius, the thicker your wall thickness, the better you will meet code. So yeah, mine has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, probably around 20 bends. It also has 60 gussets. There's a lot of welding in there. And that had to happen in the car. You couldn't take the car's body off because the body's there when you're driving the car, right? So there was a lot of really tight, out of position welding.
What did you do to the suspension? Did you modify that?
Total Chaos, one of our sponsors, makes long travel suspension kits, and I had bought everything I could afford from them for the front and rear a few years ago, and then they helped us with some of the last key critical parts for it. But yeah, I did a rear coilover conversion in the back, put really long shocks, and in the front we had really long arm suspension, so the truck was about a foot wider than stock, so then you could have more articulation. Anything else?
What prize.
Oh, the prize of not finishing?
No, price.
First place.
First place, got a finisher's pin, that's it. There's no money involved, it's all glory. That's it, thank you guys so much.